Okay, year 10. This week's poem is Caged Bird, and we will have introduced this in class. So these first two slides are for anybody who maybe didn't join in the morning meet. And the first, before you read the poem for the first time, the title is worth considering. And so in the morning meet, we will have looked at these two images, cage and bird. And so if you weren't in the morning meet, take time to look at these questions and pause the video long enough to write down some responses, because it's good to think about this and get your personal responses recorded. And by oxymoron, I just mean, two words put side by side that are seen as opposites. And so you want to think about how these two ideas are opposites, okay? And then also take time to answer this question. As a citizen of the world today, how much do you think you're free? And what does freedom mean to you? Okay, because freedom is a major theme in this poem. All right, to get started, the poet is Maya Angelou, and she is an American poet. And you can see the dates of her life from 1928 to 2014. And I've tried to include several pictures of her so you can see her throughout her lifetime in the 4 photos down here. And I included this one because it's just a lovely, beautiful picture of her personality. And she's a colorful character. If you are at all interested, she's definitely worth reading up on. She's probably one of the more famous and well-known American poets, and she has a really intriguing life story that actually she wrote quite a bit about. As much as she is a poet, she is an author. She, I think, published about 7 different memoir, autobiography type books about her life, and the first one was published, I think, in 1969, and it's called "I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings," and it is a really powerful story about the first 16, 17 years of her life. Anyway, I would highly recommend it. And so I've listed just a couple things here that could be of interest. And what I mean by this first one is her parents were divorced, and so she and her brother went between living with her grandmother in, I think it was Arkansas, and her mother, who lived in St. Louis for a while, and then later on in California. So she didn't have really stable home life, and some really traumatic things happened to her when she was a kid too. She lived a very interesting life, has many different jobs, including being the first female or first African American rail car driver in San Francisco, like when she was super young. I mean, so she's a really colorful character, and honored in her life many times. Was given loads of honorary degrees, but one of the last that she received was from President Obama, when in her final years of life, where she received the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Anyway, I could go on and on, but she's a really intriguing character who has a phenomenal life story. Okay, and what you want to notice is that she was born in the late 1920s, which means that in her childhood, as she would spend time in her living in her grandmother's house in what would be considered pretty deep South, she would have been living as an African American young girl in the 1930s, where you've got racial segregation as a legal standard of life, okay? So meaning segregation era in the United States is post slavery, okay, but pre-civil rights movement, okay? civil rights happened in the 1960s. Okay, and it didn't mean it was a done deal in the 1960s, but just became illegal for all the segregation. Didn't take care of all the bad attitudes, okay, and all the racism. But she would have been growing up in an era where there was separate everything. If you were black, then you had separate this, separate that, okay? So that's the kind of world she grew up in. And this is important because of the themes of this poem, okay? Let's go ahead and read through the poem. I have it in 2 different rows. It should all be stacked up on top of each other, yeah? With these 3 and then these 3. But I wanted the font big enough so you could actually see it. And then we'll get on to the analysis. Okay, caged bird. A free bird leaps on the back of the wind and floats downstream till the current ends, and dips his wing in the orange sun rays, and dares to claim the sky. But a bird that stalks down his narrow cage can seldom see through his bars of rage. His wings are clipped and his feet are tied, so he opens up his throat to sing. The caged bird sings with a fearful trill of things unknown but longed for still, and his tune is heard on a distant hill, for the caged bird sings of freedom. The free bird thinks of another breeze, and trade winds soft through the sighing trees, and the fat worms waiting on a dawn-bright lawn, and he names the sky his own. But the caged bird stands on the grave of dreams, his shadow shouts on a nightmare scream, his wings are clipped and his feet are tied, so he opens up his throat to sing. The caged bird sings with a fearful trill of things unknown but longed for still, and his tune is heard on a distant hill, for the caged bird sings of freedom. I'm sure you can hear the natural rhythm that this poem has to it. It's very melodic in that sense, which is very appropriate, as it's a poem about a song of freedom. And this right here is just an example. There is a ton of artwork out there that illustrates the themes and ideas of this poem, and I chose one simple one to represent the caged bird singing of the freedom it dreams of. All right. So for caged bird, to start your notes, this is something. This poem is a really powerful expression of the voice of Black Americans and their longing and struggle for freedom. Okay, to move from a status as really non-citizens, but even considered, almost like subhuman in the eyes of their slave owners, masters in, pre-Civil War in the early 1800s, to being given their freedom from slavery, but then even having to fight for equal rights as citizens in the United States. It was a long, hard struggle. And this poem is a powerful expression trying to capture that longing and that struggle. Then the second 2 points really are about Maya Angelou's poetry in general, but you're going to see these traits in this poem. Maya Angelou's poetry has been described as, quote, celebrates the ability to survive despite threatened freedom, lost love, and defeated dreams. Okay, that's true about much of her poetry. That's a quote from a poetry critic. Okay, and then another observation that someone has made about her poetry is that an important idea for her is expressing the idea of not succumbing to defeat and despair. That even though you are maybe defeated currently or feeling a sense of despair, this idea of not letting it overcome you, to continue to hope, to continue to dream. and in this case, continue to sing. Okay, and it's interesting too that one of her early careers was acting and singing. Okay, and also think, and sorry, and also another thing that's really interesting about her story is that she went through a period of time in her life where she didn't speak for I think it was 5 years, and it's a really traumatic thing that happened. But so voice and expression and being heard are really important ideas in her own story of her life. So I find that an interesting connection here too, with this whole idea of voice and being heard, and using your voice to express your hope and to cry out against inequality. Okay, so you're going to want these basic overview notes into your notes. So basically, this poem is about two birds. There's a free bird and a caged bird. Okay, and if you can look at them symbolically or likely. Okay, I'm going to use really open-handed interpretation here. Okay, because yes, likely the free bird represents a white American, in the context in which she grew up, and the caged bird likely represents the Black American whose rights and liberties were restricted and restrained by society, and just even opportunities and advantage that were available to them. However, we should not limit the meaning of this poem to that context only. It is likely the context that it reflects, but we definitely want to think about other groups of people or instances where people are a caged bird. Okay, so don't limit it. Okay, but we do need to appreciate the era in which the poet grew up and understand the likely expression or the likely place that this this poem is about. Okay, so we have in the poem, the free bird has a life marked by dignity, grandeur, and infinite possibilities, while the caged bird's life is marked by fear, longing, and subjugation. Okay, subjugation meaning being put down. To subjugate someone is to lord over them, keep them restrained and limited. Okay. Freebird continues to enjoy life and broad horizons. It just keeps going and going in this poem for the Freebird. I mean, there's no sense of struggle at all for the Freebird. Okay, it's just life is good, and for the Freebird, his horizons are wide and keep getting wider. And for the caged bird, you have this sense of sinking deeper and deeper into the negation of his existence, like so limited he becomes he was being referred to as a shadow. Okay, so it's like almost like becoming invisible, and the idea of the torture and suffering that is there with the inequality between the two birds and the limitations of the caged bird's freedoms. And then, and if you think about it too, her use of a bird is meant to fly, meant to cruise through the sky. Okay, that's what's natural. That's what it should be doing. Just like the idea of basic human rights, what should be true for all humans, and this idea of repressing or withholding from someone is this sense of taking away part of who they are. Okay. And then lastly, the we are struck by even though this is true about the caged bird continues to sing about his desire for freedom, continues to hope, continues to dream. Okay. In this slide, I know the font is really, really small. I don't expect you necessarily to be able to read it. But the reason I've done this is I want us to look at some of the form and structure pieces of this poem. So I'm sure you could already tell that the poem has 6 stanzas. But I would like you to observe that the first, second, third, and final all have, kind of a similar shape size. But these two stanzas here, stanzas 4 and 5, the poet has chosen longer line lengths. You could go through and break these lines in half, and you would get the same thing as you've got here. And the final lines here of "and dares to claim the sky," and he names the sky his own. Very similar, and you could kind of break these in half. But it's interesting that she's chosen, in essence, a shorter stanza. But when you read it, if you weren't looking at the page, you wouldn't even know. Because the rhythm is maintained, and you could go through and break the lines and get the same effect. Okay, so it's not necessarily a shorter stanza or longer, but she has opted for quatrains here, while these up here have 7 lines in them. Okay, and we can think about reasons why she's done that. My theory, at least for this one, is to emphasize the ands, but you can see the ands here at the beginning of these lines as well. And I have a comment about that in a later slide. We could also think about, what is she maybe talking about that's maybe longer, endless in this one, and what, long and seemingly endless in this one as well. Anyway, something to think about. But I wanted you to also just to see it all lined up as it would on a page. And if this one comes up on the exam, it would be laid out like this. Anyway, the other thing is just to appreciate the pattern, that you've got a stanza about the free bird, and then a contrasting stanza about the caged bird, and then the refrain, which is about the caged bird's song. And stanzas 3 and 6 are identical. Okay, in fact, in this stanza it's 3 lines, and in this stanza it's 2 lines, but these are also identical. Okay, so you got half the poem basically that's repeated. Okay, and that links right in here with these song features, that this is a poem about a song that the caged bird sings, and so it's really appropriate that it have song features. And if you listen to songs on the radio, you will hear that singers write lyrics. They'll have a verse and then a chorus, and a verse, and then sing the chorus again. And sometimes you have something that's called like a pre-chorus, and it's a couple of lines that might come like between the verses, but it's not quite the chorus, but it can get repeated as well. And these underlined lines that I have here kind of function like a pre-chorus. We have some amount of rhyming, not a lot, which I think suits the topic. I think if it was too much rhyming, it would take away from the seriousness of the poem. But some of the rhymed words, especially in the chorus, there's some emphasis given to those words, and we're going to talk about those on another slide, which helps emphasize some key ideas. But there's a really strong sense of rhythm. A lot of it's iambic, but you can hear it when you read it, and it should this. Oh, I say this all the time. Poems are meant to be read out loud, okay? But this one really should be experienced out loud because of the melodic, lyrical value of the poem, because of the rhythm, and because of the passion that's really in this poem, okay? All right, so as far as structure, this is the layout, and I've just tried to kind of color code these so you can see. But you've got these, like, here's what it's like for the free bird, but this is what it's like for the caged bird. And so the caged bird sings. This is what it's like for the free bird, but this is what it's like for the in contrast, the caged bird's life. So, what can the caged bird do? The caged bird sings. All right, let's get on with our analysis. Okay, so starting with the free bird, I've put both the stanzas that have to do with the free bird together here, even though they don't follow. You know what? I've got this wrong. This should be stanza 4. Let me see if I can fix it right now. Right mid-video, okay? Because stanza 3 is the chorus. Okay, so stanza 1 and stanza 4. And what I want to focus on is this idea that the free bird's life is marked by dignity, grandeur, and infinite possibilities. A free bird leaps on the back of the wind and floats downstream till the current ends, and dips his wing in the orange sun rays and dares to claim the sky. The free bird thinks of another breeze, and trade winds soft through the sighing trees, and the fat worms waiting on a dawn-bright lawn, and he names the sky his own. All right, so what I have first here for dignity is that when we are given the images of this free bird moving through the sky, we get these pictures of graceful movement, that he's at his leisure, and then he, like, this idea of like him traveling in style, okay? And as far as grandeur, the idea that the sunset sky is his, the winds are serving him, and he's got these big fat worms just waiting for him. I mean, he's like a king, yeah? King of the sky. And then to go along with that idea, the infinite possibilities. I don't know if you guys ever heard the saying, the sky's the limit. And by saying sky's the limit, you mean you have no limits, because the sky is sort of, goes on into atmosphere, and it's huge and wide, and so it's like, to say the sky is a limit means that we have so many possibilities. We can do whatever we want. We have the money to do whatever. And so you get that sense about the free bird's life, is that he's got no limits. Everything's his. It's that everything's an option for him. Okay, the line "another breeze" reflects how this bird has choices. Trade wind is kind of an old sailing term, that old trade ships. The trade winds would be routes, or steady wind, steady winds that trade ships would use on trade routes. Okay, and so you've got trade winds has a link with like business. Okay, it's an old-fashioned term, but they're still called that. So the idea, like, business opportunities are open to this bird. And dawn bright, I mean, we often think symbolically of like sunrise or dawn, daybreak. It can symbolically stand for like fresh new beginnings. The day is fresh and new with, no mistakes in it, kind of thing. Or, it's the dawn of a new day, the dawn of a new era. The idea is like that it's just the beginning. We're just starting. We have so many possibilities. Okay. So you have all these references and images that go along with the free bird's description. And you get this real sense that the free bird is, it is the world is his oyster. Okay, it's anything's possible for this bird. Okay, and I have highlighted and underlined the 6 ands that start lines in this these 2 stanzas. Sorry, I'm stumbling over my words. And I think that really emphasizes, even though it's a small, seemingly unimportant word, and, that she has placed them right at the beginning of all these lines. Now, one, it helps with the rhythm, because and does not get emphasized and floats downstream and dips his wing. It gives her the ba-bum, ba-bum rhythm that she's creating here. But it also gives some emphasis to them, that they and this and this and this. Okay, I think that emphasis and starting so many different lines with the ands has this effect of, like, we've got this like ongoing endless list of all the advantages that the free bird has. Okay. And he's got this, and he's got that, and he's got access to this, and this is going for him. Okay, you get the idea? It just goes on and on for the wonderful free advantaged free bird. Okay. Now, part 2 of the free bird is that the free bird enjoys life, his natural rights, and he has really broad horizons. Okay, like, he's got advantage. There's just like nothing against this guy. Okay, so starting with the idea of enjoying life, and here I'm trying to focus in on some key, like some language choices. So first off, we have the verb leaps, and we hear, I mean, at least for me, the word leaps is a really active verb, but it also suggests energy. That there's a lot of vitality and energy in this bird's life. He's got vigor. He's ready to go. One, probably because nothing's holding him back. But there's a real energy to his life. And then the next verb that's used is floats, and especially floats downstream. I mean, I know he's in the sky, but you almost can envision this bird like chilling on a inner tube or something, or a big, those big floating mattresses, and like floating the river. Just kind of lazy, floating. And when you float downstream, you have to put 0 effort into moving. Okay, I don't know if any of you've ever floated a river. It's fantastic. If you ever have the opportunity to do it, someday you should. But you really there's nothing. You put in 0 energy, 0 effort to float downstream. And so you get this idea that life carries this bird along, that he really doesn't have to work for anything. It just happens for him. Okay, it's easy. Okay, you want to think about what these images suggest. That life's easy for the free bird, for the advantaged bird. That he doesn't have to. It almost seems like he doesn't have to work for anything, and he certainly doesn't have to struggle for anything. Okay, dips his wing. This like just kind of suggestion of like soaring, and soaring again is like, yes, a bird has to put some energy into getting up to a place where they can soar. But once a bird is soaring, you're working with the wind that's there, and turning and gliding. And again, it has this idea of ease, and just sort of enjoying, tootling around, dip your wings, just like you can just ride it out, man. And then it ends this stanza 1 with dares to claim the sky. And Dares suggest a couple things. Dares either suggest that this bird is confident enough to take risks, or perhaps this bird feels entitled. Perhaps he doesn't think there's anything wrong with claiming the sky. It's his. He's a bird, for crying out loud. Okay? Underneath here, I have this idea that the sky is the natural habitat for birds. They're designed to fly. They don't actually. Birds, as a class of animals, if you will, or class of creatures, doesn't. No other class of, in the animal kingdom, no other creatures, share the sky with them. Okay? So it is natural and maybe even right for birds to see the sky as their domain. And that's how the free bird feels. It's like, this is mine. I get to do this. This is my territory. Okay? And so you might read entitlement into that, but you also would say, no, it's actually natural. And you can connect that with the idea of like basic human rights. Okay? Like the idea that it is natural to want to live a life with liberty. It's like a natural, basic right that we should all feel, that we have. I know in the American Constitution it's like that all humans have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. These are our basic kind of God-given rights, and so like that. While it maybe comes across as entitled, all birds would feel that way, like that the sky is their place, and that it's where they belong. They belong soaring and free in the sky. Okay. All right. So, but what we see here too in the free bird is this idea of advantage. Okay. Everything is for him. It's on his side. Everything's helping him. Okay. And especially all these references to, a lot of it's the wind. Okay. I mean, if you're a bird and your natural habitat is the sky, then wind is a very important element. And so it's referenced lots of times, yeah? He leaps on the back of the wind, downstream of the current, and dipping his wing in the sun rays, okay? But, we have this kind of backdrop behind him of this, like, orange sky, which would suggest, like, sunset kind of moment. And then we have breeze sighing, or trade winds sighing through the trees. I mean, there's loads of references to the wind. And you have this idea that nothing is a struggle for this bird. Okay? It's almost like everything's laid out for this bird. The words downstream and current, like I already mentioned how it kind of sounds like he's like floating a river. But, I mean, a bird can do the same thing on a stream of air, okay? But yeah, like idea is just riding along, not having to work for it, okay? You're going to hear how the connections between advantaged citizens and disadvantaged citizens comes through here. The use of the word another here in front of breeze connects with the idea that this bird has loads of choices, freedom of choice, lots of choice. I mean, if you I fancy trying this, okay? But that's an option for them, okay? Again, I've already mentioned this, that trade winds, like you have the idea like business is easy. Maybe their jobs are easy, or success in business seems to come easy to them. I mean, it's a suggestion that could be there. And the idea, too, of the softness of the trade winds and the sign through the sighing trees. It's a really peaceful sound, and auditory effect, especially with soft and sighing, with that sibilance that's there. And just it makes it sound peaceful, but you also have this idea like they're not having to fight for anything, not having to push, or against anything to make things happen for them. And then lastly, these fat worms waiting on the dawn bright lawn. I really like that line. But it's almost like he barely has to try. You know, the whole like early bird gets the worm kind of thing. Yeah, he's out at dawn, but it's like the worms are just laying there on the lawn, wait, like, all right, served up. You know, like he doesn't have to try. Things are just practically given to him. Okay, it's just easy. Everything's easy because he's advantaged. Okay, remember that this poem is about inequality. Both the characters, I guess, in this poem are birds, but one has definite advantage over the other. But they're both birds. Okay, and so you want to keep that in mind. That the main themes here are about freedom and inequality or access to the same freedoms. Because they're both birds, you know, so you get the idea that they both deserve. And this is supposed to be stanza 4 in this one too. Okay. All right, we're not going to let that lay. All right, and this one should say stanza 5. This is real live action video, guys. Okay, moving to the caged bird. So the caged bird stanzas are stanzas 2 and 5. And the caged bird's life is marked by fear, longing, and subjugation, as I already mentioned. Let's read the stanzas, and then I've got 2 slides on this one as well. But a bird that stalks down his narrow cage can seldom see through his bars of rage. His wings are clipped and his feet are tied, so he opens up his throat to sing. But the caged bird stands on the grave of dreams. His shadow shouts on a nightmare scream. His wings are clipped and his feet are tied, so he opens up his throat to sing. All right, so I've got the key words from this sentence here: fear, longing, and subjugation. Where do we get those ideas? Well, fear, it talks about bars of rage. It talks about a cage and bars of rage. And note how those 2 words rhyme, giving some emphasis that this cage, this narrow cage that he's in, is made of bars of rage. Okay? Now, we can ask ourselves whose rage that it is, but fear would come when there's rage. Okay, especially if the rage is at us, then we become fearful. I'm connecting fear with the idea of clipped wings, and I'm also connecting fear with the phrase nightmare scream. Okay, if anybody's ever had a nightmare, even woken up from one, kind of like screaming, you know that like the terror of that sensation. Okay, that's a really powerful image. All of these I'm going to talk about in the next slide. Okay, this is kind of like overview. Longing, like the idea of wanting so desperately for something. You have this idea of the caged birds trying to see through the bars. It says he can hardly see, or can seldom see. Okay, but like looking, trying to see, even though can't really see it very well, looking for something. And then this idea of grave of dreams. If whatever your dreams are, reference to hope and your future plans, and it's sad that it says grave of dreams, of course. And again, I'm going to talk about all of these metaphors in the next slide. And then we get the idea of subjugation. Remember, being kept down, ruled over by someone else. Okay, so that we get that idea from the idea that the bird's inside a cage behind bars, and of course, you know, this is all like like a metaphor, yeah. That they have been kept prisoner by clipped wings and tied feet. And this idea of stalking, and by stalking I mean like stalks down his narrow cage. This idea of like he's trapped in this small space, and so the only thing he can do is like to stalk down with kind of like the idea of like pacing, and being kept from seeing. Okay, and I'm getting that from can seldom see. Okay. Okay. So for slide 2 of Caged Bird, this one's the one. This on this side I have more in-depth comments about each of the aspects that were on the last slide. The idea, let's start over here with the narrow cage, bars of rage. Again, you should mark those as rhymed words, and the fact that they're rhymed brings some emphasis to them. And again, there's not a ton of rhyming in this poem, and so when she does use it, it draws attention to these words. And cage and rage, a narrow cage that's made of bars of rage, is a really powerful image. Okay, now why is it a powerful image, or how does the poet make it a powerful image? Well, first of all, it's suggested that there's a limitation of freedom, that the caged bird is like a prisoner, and that somehow they are restrained. You could link that to the idea of enslavement too. Like even though maybe you're not a slave anymore, your rights and opportunities are still limited. So you like the idea of like a slave to your situation, or trapped by various aspects of your context. Okay, bars of rage. Again, the word rage is a really emotive, dramatic word, and this image of bars of rage. Rage has the definition of rage is like extreme or violent anger, and so the extreme and violent anger act like a prison. They block the view of things beyond his reach, and one of those things is the sky, the place where he belongs. Is you can't even, you get the idea like you can't even see it. Now we have to ask ourselves, whose rage is his prison? Is it his own rage? Is it the rage and anger of others that keep him? Is it both? It's an interpretation point for you to decide about. And then this idea of stalking, okay? I know the word stalk gets used a lot differently these days, but if you, this was written, probably close to 20 years ago now. Or not 20, close to 50 years ago now. Okay, so stalking, like if somebody stalks off, if you use it in that way, it means they kind of like walk in a way that's like hurried and maybe shows like anger or that they're upset. Okay, and so here you have the idea like the bird is like has this really small amount of space to go up and down in. Okay, and the bird is meant to fly, but he's got clipped wings and he's inside a cage, and so the only thing he can do, just like a prisoner in a cell, if you've got the urge and the natural instinct to move, is just like you can just kind of go back and forth. And that movement of pacing, and to call it stalking down his narrow cage, you get the suggestions of anger or being upset or agitated. Okay? That this is uncomfortable for this bird. All right? And then over here, Grave of Dreams, that metaphor, very powerful itself, very emotive. This idea, the suggestion of the death of hope, that this bird's dreams are dead and buried. If we're talking about a grave, it says he stands on the grave of dreams. Like everything that they hoped for, it is dead if it's in a grave. This really has a suggestion of a bleak future. And then the very next line, his shadow shouts on a nightmare scream. These are just really two emotive lines that, building up. I mean, this is kind of the climax, if you will, of this poem. Um, and again with the 4 and not the 5. Okay, so we want to appreciate these two phrases here. His shadow shouts, and some nice alliteration, bringing some unity and emphasis to this image. Now, here's where we really get this idea of the negation of existence. Like I've already established that it is natural and good for a bird to fly. It's like what they're made for. Okay, it's the design of their bodies to fly, and for a bird to be in a cage. That's what the idea of like a caged bird being an oxymoron is. Like, it's completely what it's not for. It's not for living in a cage. And so the idea of something that should be so natural and normal for a person, and then to have that be denied, has this idea of like kind of taking away of who you are. And so her use of the word shadow has that idea of like your existence being dark or uncertain, that that you become not the full version of yourself. If someone's like a shadow, it's like either they're mysterious or almost like they're disappearing, or they're hidden, they're in the dark, they're not like full substance if you're just a shadow. Okay, but we have this idea that the shadow is shouting. Okay, his shadow shouts, and again, it's this idea of using his voice, and it's powerful. A shout is a powerful use of voice. That the personhood that maybe feels like it's being threatened, an identity that's threatened and not fully realized, is shouting and crying out against the injustice of this situation. All right. And then the image here of nightmare scream. Again, really emotive, really powerful phrase, something that a lot of people can identify with, to wake up from a nightmare, like verbally screaming or feeling like you're trying to get a scream out. Life is so bad that it's compared to a nightmare. Okay, if you call something or like an experience and you call it a nightmare, it's pretty strong language. Like, it's as bad as this like surreal dream that like where everything goes wrong, or something is so terror filled that it feels like it could only happen in a nightmare. Like, things aren't usually this bad. So it has that like almost unbelievably bad. It also suggests panic and fear, a lot of fear. And then scream is an emotional vocal response to the fear and terror of his reality. That even though it feels like a nightmare, like something that is so bad it can't be real, but that's his reality. Okay, like that's how bad the inequality, injustice, and restraint, and the lack of freedom that this bird has. That's the emotional quality of it. Okay, and I also want to mention the clipped wings and tied feet that is repeated. Okay, here and here. Okay. What I refer to as like the pre-chorus. It's a repeated idea, so it's an image that you get twice. That this bird, who's designed and meant in nature to be soaring through the sky like the free bird, instead we have a bird whose wings have been clipped. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with clipping of birds' wings, but if you're going to keep a bird as a pet and you don't want it to fly away because you paid a bunch of money for it, sometimes they'll clip the bird's wings so that if it does get out of its cage, or if you want to like let the bird sort of live in kind of roam around a larger space, but you have the feeling that he might get out, what's a bird going to do if he gets out of the cage? Well, duh, he's going to fly because that's what he's designed to do. So people will clip the wings of pet birds so that they actually are unable to fly. And so you can think about like the sort of cruelty maybe of it, the unnaturalness of it, maybe even the idea of like disfiguring or torture. I mean, you get really kind of emotive in your interpretation of it, but it's at least against nature, and it's at least painful, okay, and it's done to keep the bird subjugated, to keep it prisoner. All right, so you have this idea that not only is the bird kept in a cage, but he's had his wings clipped as well. And as if that wasn't bad enough, his feet are also tied. Okay, so like if you can imagine this little bird in his cage, he's got his clipped. They take feathers off when they clip the wings, and so those have been clipped off. Not their whole wings, of course. They're just a couple key feathers that without them they can't fly properly. Okay, and so that takes away their freedom. And then the last bit that takes away their freedom is, you can imagine in our little image of the cage bird, that he's got like this little like chain and link around his little foot, so he's tied, and you get this idea like somebody being held captive. You definitely get the image of somebody that's a prisoner, somebody that's restrained, and maybe even the idea of like slavery. Okay, but like everything is holding this bird back. Okay, everything's been done to disadvantage this bird and not give it its natural, normal freedoms of a bird. Okay, you also need to appreciate that the verbs are clipped and are tied are passive verbs, and so this is something that's been done to him. The bird has not done this to himself. Okay, he has been acted upon, and everything that's limiting his freedom is not his choice. Okay, and what's interesting, I think, is that you get this. I mean, you get stanza 1, you get this whole lovely description of the free bird, and then you get this strong contrast with the but. But this is how it is for the cage bird. But this is how it is for the cage bird. And when you get to the end of the second stanza, it's almost, to me, the first time you read it, it's like a surprise. He opens his throat. If all these things were true for me, like I'm being held captive, I can't even see past the rage and the anger, and somebody has taken away my freedom. I mean, even if I got out of the cage I'm in, I still couldn't fly because my wings have been clipped. They've tied me up. If I was going to open my throat, I doubt it would be to sing. If I was going to open my throat, I'd probably be screaming. And it doesn't mention shout and scream down here. But it's like, because all of this limitation, because of all of this situation of loss of hope, loss of dream, life so bad it feels like a nightmare, he opens up his throat to sing. Really? Well, and it intrigues us. First of all, we're surprised that he's going to sing. Okay, so we think, well, maybe he's going to sing the blues or something. But what's the bird going to sing about? And because for me, the word sing is quite hopeful. If you have like the saying like a song in your heart or something like that, you have this idea like somebody's got some expression. Now, of course, singing can be sad, and you can have emotive, sad songs and all that. But it sounds to me like a setup for some expression of hope, even though it seems like this bird could be buried by his lost dreams and lost hope. Okay, it's definitely a threat. It's definitely a possibility. But this bird is going to sing. And what's he going to sing about? He's going to sing about freedom. Okay, his hope for freedom. Now remember that I mentioned, I think it's up here in this slide, that in Maya Angelou's poetry, one thing that you see is this important idea of not succumbing to defeat and despair. Even though defeat and despair you may be facing those things, but we do not succumb. Okay, and to succumb means to give in. Okay, to let it win. Okay, so you don't win every round. You get discouraged. You don't let it have the last word. All right, so analysis points on the chorus refrain that makes stanza 3 and 6. Okay, let's start with let's read it first. The cage bird sings with a fearful trill of things unknown but longed for still, and his tune is heard on a distant hill, for the cage bird sings of freedom. It's very, very beautiful, very powerful refrain here. First, let's start with fearful trill. Okay, now fearful I think is meant to have a double meaning here. You shouldn't be surprised at this in poetry. One thing could definitely be I think the definition that we first go to is obviously something that's full of fear. Okay, being afraid. But you can also use the word fearful to mean intense. Okay, and so this bird's song, while the bird may face fear, okay, or maybe feels fear, this song that the bird sings is also intense. Okay, and trill, that may be a new word for you, but it's a sound word, and it's something that you can do with your voice when you're singing, but it's specifically a word used to describe birds' songs, and it's the repetition the fast repetition of sounds between two pitches. I'm not gonna try to even mimic a trill, okay? But okay, that's as much as I'm gonna do. Okay, but you can imagine, you hear birds singing all the time, and trill is that kind of quick switch between two different tones. Okay, that's what trill is. But it's a musical word, but specifically used for birds. Keep that in mind though, because it links in with our rhyming words. But let's look at longing first before we look at our rhyme words. So, remember we said that the cage bird experience had to do with fear, longing, and subjugation. And really in this song is where we hear the longing, okay? I mean, it says it explicitly, for crying out loud, okay? Things unknown but longed for still. So we have this idea of heart's desire. Things that are unknown, but almost instinctively knows that he should have. Okay, and I think those are references to basic human rights and personal freedom. Okay, things that he intuitively knows that he was made for, but yet is denied. Okay, this idea of singing for something, it's the last word in stanzas 2 and 4, but it's also, the word is repeated here. The cage bird sings, the cage bird sings. Okay, and he sings and he sings and he sings, and you have this idea that he's longing, singing, dreaming, kind of almost telling himself reassuring himself, keeping the dream alive within himself, that one day there will be freedom. But the other important thing too is the idea like that someone will hear the longing of the caged bird's heart, the longing and natural need and desire for rights and freedom. Okay. Now, when we get to looking at the 3 rhymed words that come at the end of these 3 lines here, trill, still, and hill, and it's the strongest sense of rhyme in the poem, okay? And it comes in the chorus, which is, kind of like the most song-like. And we want to think about why these 3 words might have been chosen, why, like what each of these words signifies, and how, because of the rhyme, they're memorable and they're emphasized. Now, I've already told you that trill has the idea of rapid repetition, but you could even like think about how it could be like a repeated song. The bird keeps singing it and singing it and singing it. This intense song that shows its longing for freedom. Okay, and then we have the word still. Like this if you use the word still, like I still am doing this, I still haven't done this, okay? So still can have this idea of like continuing, or even though I'm still gonna hang in there, okay? So this idea of continuing on, saying keep singing, even though the bird doesn't have the freedoms, he longs for them still. So just because he's never experienced them doesn't mean he can't long for them still, okay? So you've got this like hanging in there with the hope and the dream. And of course it all builds up to this final word of freedom. And then lastly, hill. Okay, now the word that comes right in front of it, distant, is really important, I think. But let's talk about what a hill is, okay? First, a hill is like a place of higher ground, okay? A height. You go up a hill, and where if you're standing below a hill, you have to, climb the hill. But when you get up at the top of the hill, man, the view, the higher place you will be. Okay, this hill happens to be a distant hill. Okay, it's far off, and you get this idea from trill, still, and hill, like is continuing on in a hope for the day when their voices will be heard and then their dreams will be realized. And by realized meaning come true, okay? So you have this idea that they will continue, even though they don't have the freedoms that they long for, they're going to continue singing this intense song until it's heard, and the people or whoever it is on the distant hill, even if it's like at first kind of a faint sound, like what's that, you have the idea like if it's heard on a distant hill, either it's a faint like noise and it maybe grows louder when you listen, or maybe this song is so intense that it can be heard on a distant hill, meaning this is a powerful, powerful song that can't be ignored forever, okay? So I think there's 2 interpretations there, I think, that, but it has the idea of like ascent, to go up someday, in a distant day, someday in the future, we are going to achieve, we are going to gain higher ground. But it also, too, is just like their voice needs to be heard by others who can help realize their dreams, by others who make decisions, by others who need to respect their rights, others who could maybe help their freedoms be granted. And of course, like I've already said, this all ends with the word freedom, and that's why I have underlined and bolded. It does not rhyme, which actually I think is kind of even more powerful for it not to rhyme. It kind of breaks the pattern of rhyme, and that's the word she leaves you at. That we are our hope, our song, our intense song that you are going to hear eventually is our song and our hope and our dream for freedom. Okay, you can't not hear it. Eventually, it will be heard, and eventually, dreams will be realized. And then I just have a list too here of all the references to sound and use of voice. Open throat, sing, trill, tune, heard on distant hill, shout and scream. And then I have here, what is he using his voice for? So that his dream of freedom will be heard and listened to and one day realized. So that his natural right will be granted. So bring necessary attention to the inequality between the two birds. Okay, that the caged bird is going to sing and sing and sing until one day the inequality will be made right. That the people outside the cage, the people on the distant hill, will hear this bird's longing, natural right to freedom. Okay. You can see why this is such a powerful and really well-known poem. And my last slide here is just about context. And I want you, as I started the video with, is just to have a think about the historical context that Maya Angelou grew up in, and where she also worked alongside major civil rights movement people like Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, who both were assassinated as part of civil rights movement in the USA in the 1960s. Just to understand that this poem was written, I don't know when it was written exactly. I couldn't find, I looked for that information. What I could find out is it was published in the early 1980s. Okay? And so this poem was written possibly in a place where they had achieved, certain amount of victory in the civil rights movement. But I can't be sure when it was written. But certainly, Maya Angelou lived through not having, being the caged bird, and lived through the longing to see equal civil rights become a reality for African Americans. All right. However, we want to not just think, oh, well, that was about that time, and that's all taken care of now. Although current events in the news right now, you know that that's not true. But I also would challenge you to think about the caged bird metaphor, and if the racism is a very strong and current topic for sure, that you could think about, that even though it seems like we should have moved past this, that it's still an issue, okay? But you could also think, too, about how the caged bird metaphor might apply to other groups in modern day as well. And so I just want you to think about connections you could make to other groups of people. Maybe they're even individuals, okay? But who do you see facing barriers to freedom that others enjoy? Like, other people enjoy this freedom, and there's like an unjust barrier to this other group or this other person to enjoying the same freedoms. And now we're not talking about like criminals in prison, okay, so like that, like they've done something to sort of forfeit their freedoms, okay, but we're like talking about unjust barriers, okay. My second question is, who is only dreaming of freedom that they should have the right to, okay, like somebody who has to just dream about it, about something that they really should have access to, or they should be enjoying it, but they're not allowed to. And then, whose human right to life and liberty is being withheld unjustly? And where is there inequality in freedoms, access, and opportunity? Just here at the end of the video, spend a little bit of time just brainstorming, either individuals or groups, that where you see this happening now. Where do you see unjust, unfair inequality of freedoms, access, and opportunity? Who are today's caged birds? Because that way you can really develop a personal response to this. You can think about the historical context, but you can also develop a personal modern day response to this poem. All right, that's the end of this analysis.